Good evening. My name is Vivian Herbert. I'm a current Harvard junior, but 4 years ago I was a City Year Corps member, proudly serving on the State Street team at the Higginson Lewis Elementary School in Roxbury, Massachusetts. I'm one of thousands, if not millions of people whose life has been changed forever by public service and by my work with AmeriCorps. The moment I put on my City Year red jacket, I immediately felt that I was part of a legacy of service to a cause greater than self. As an 18-year-old City Year Corps member on a team of mostly college graduates, I knew I had agreed to a year of challenges and growth. What I did not know was the unparalleled joy that I would experience every single day. That is the beauty of public service that I believe brings us all here today. The idea that we are put on this earth to make the lives of our fellow citizens better and brighter. Whether it's a third grade student or a stranger on the bus, to serve one another is to say, I see you. Or as we call it at City Year, Ubuntu. My humanity is tied to yours. There's not a day that goes by where I don't miss being covered in khakis and slime and stickers. My students now live in a framed picture on my desk in my apartment, formerly in my Elliott House dorm, but they are always at the forefront of my mind. My students and my service taught me bravery, determination, and the ability to make absolutely anything silly, no matter how frustrating or scary that thing may be. There are moments that were silly, moments that were difficult. There were days when I felt like I wasn't doing my best job, or the classroom dynamic was off, or a kid told me that I looked tired. And when a kid tells you look tired, you know they really mean it. But I am the Harvard student and the person I am today because of my time as an AmeriCorps member. I've been thinking a lot about my students during this pandemic as I complete my own education online. During a time that has been so difficult for our nation, it feels as though the call to serve has been resounding louder than ever. While I've had moments where I've feared for the future of our young people, I've also been overwhelmingly encouraged by the sheer amount of my Harvard peers who have approached me to ask about what it's like to take a gap year in pursuit of national service. These interactions always remind me of a conversation I had with former City Year CEO Michael Brown. He said he likes to imagine a world where one of the first questions we ask each other is, where did you serve? I'm proud to say that I served with City Year Boston as an AmeriCorps member. I keep my red jacket on the back of my desk chair as a reminder that even though I no longer wear it every day, I never truly took it off. My belief in the power of young people is unwavering. My commitment to living a life of service is certain. But most importantly, my gratitude to leaders like Senator Chris Coons and Director Mark Gearan, who paved the way for students like myself, is immense. With that in mind, it is my distinct pleasure to introduce two champions of the Peace Corps, who have shown a commitment to service that has traveled across continents, Capitol Hill, and the Senate floor. Senator Chris Coons was elected to represent Delaware in the US Senate in 2010 and has worked tirelessly to find bipartisan solutions to the challenges facing Delaware, the nation, and the world. Senator Coons has used his committee posts to advocate for key foreign policy and international development priorities and protect the health and safety of Peace Corps volunteers around the world. Mark Gearan is the director of the Institute of Politics at the Kennedy School and has held numerous leadership roles in American politics, government, and education. He has served as the president of Hobart and William and Smith Colleges for 18 years, as well as serving in the Clinton administration as the White House Deputy Chief of Staff, White House Communications Director, and Director of the Peace Corps. Please join me in welcoming Senator Chris Coons and IOP Director Mark Gearan.
Well, Vivian, thank you very much for that generous introduction. But more importantly, your testimony to the importance of service. And we thank you, Senator. I think you join with me in thanking Vivian for her service and the way you spoke so beautifully about the importance of service in your own journey and what your model of service meant to your students. So thank you for kicking us off in such a way and thoughtful way. Senator, welcome. Welcome back to the Institute of Politics. It's great to you've just come off the Senate floor for some votes, so we thank you for coming to this Zoom room. We're honored to have you back to the Institute. Your last visit with us was with your former colleague and our great resident fellow, Senator Jeff Flake, at the study group. So it's so nice to have you back.
Well, thank you. Thank you, Director Gearan, to the Institute of Politics at Harvard, Harvard's Kennedy School, and to the John F. Kennedy Jr. Forum. And a special thanks to Vivian. As you said, it was really inspiring to begin our evening conversation by hearing from Vivian just how much service meant to her. This evening, as we celebrate the 60th anniversary of the Peace Corps, that visionary step forward in how civilian service can have a lifetime impact on young Americans, initiated by President Kennedy. It is stirring to hear her story of her time teaching in Roxbury, Massachusetts as a member of City Year, and the lasting impact that it's had both on her students and on her. As I think you may know, Mark, I participated in helping launch one of the first national direct AmeriCorps programs with the National I Have a Dream Foundation. One of my favorite leaders of one of our sites from Hartford, Connecticut, was himself both a Marine Corps, a combat veteran of Vietnam, and a member of one of the very first classes of Peace Corps volunteers. And to hear him speak to young Americans who were joining AmeriCorps in our program about what the call to national service meant to him, and to also hear from some, at that point, very seasoned citizens who had served in the Civilian Conservation Corps in the 1930s at some of our training programs, was a reminder for me of how the thread of national volunteer service runs throughout a lot of the fabric of modern American life, and is one of those threads that helps pull us all together.
That's so well said, and certainly you embody it. In fact, earlier today, you were inducted into the National Service Hall of Fame. Congratulations on that. And certainly you, by all my friends in the service movement, you're known as the MVP of service, and most recently with the getting $1 billion into the American Rescue Plan. So we thank you for that. And it really runs in your family. I've heard you reflect that you met your wife on the State Service Commission, and your work.
That's correct.
And as county executive, and this has been such a big part of your professional and your personal life.
Well, and I probably shouldn't get ahead of myself, but I have three college-age children, one of whom has already told me that his plans for after college is to be an AmeriCorps member and to teach in schools in under-resourced communities. I'm hopeful that that's, in fact, what he'll do. But I certainly have seen how AmeriCorps service really is a transformative experience for young people. One of my best friends in law school was a Peace Corps volunteer. And I must say it was a life-changing experience for him as well. I think service is the rent that we pay for a living, is the way that we give back to and hear and heal and connect ourselves to other people in our community and around the world. And I'm grateful for the chance to talk about service as part of this evening's conversation.
Well, let's stay on the service while we're on this topic, because it's sort of, as Vivian said so well, City Year, we're particularly proud of it here at Harvard, because it's the two co-founders, Michael Brown, who she referenced, and Ellen Casey, were undergraduates, and in their dorm in Grace Hall, they spent time thinking about what is now City Year. So we're proud of that and proud of the effort. But for many of us at this time in our nation's civic life, and you're the right one to ask because of your leadership in the Senate and your closeness to the president, to assess from both angles. But this is seems like a unique moment in our civic life to have the kind of engagement that Vivian has to broaden the opportunities for service. But where do you place this moment now? You were early with your own I Have a Dream effort. You've acknowledged the 60-year history of the Peace Corps. Where do you place it in today's contemporary political and civic life?
Well, national service is one of the most broadly bipartisan ideas or proposals. There was just an article in The Hill, which is one of the campus newspapers of Congress today, co-written by Ry Barcott, who leads With Honor, which is a veteran group that focuses on getting veterans elected to office, and Ann Moore Connolly, who leads Voices for National Service, which advocates for national service. One of the things in that column was recent polling data that shows that support for a year or two of national service is one of the most widely supported, most bipartisan ideas we have. That's because of the positive impact that national service has both on those who perform it and on the communities which they serve, and on the core or the cadre in which they serve. So first, it's a great way to get skills and to earn part of a college opportunity, because if you serve in AmeriCorps, you get a Pell Grant, or roughly $5,200 for your college expenses. It's also a great way to get relevant, concrete skills for your future work career or life of service. It's a way to get out of the cocoon or the bubble or the community that may have raised you and to meet people of different backgrounds. And it's a great way to actually connect with Americans in need or whose journey you can help make easier, whether it's veterans or working in the environment or helping a food bank or teaching in a school. So I'm convinced that this is a great moment in the journey of national service in America. And so is President Biden. I had a one-on-one conversation with him after the election and during the transition to say to him, look, bluntly, Joe, lots of stuff gets put up on your campaign website or put out in speeches. But it's helpful for me to hear you proposed, Mr. President, a civilian climate corps and a public health jobs corps as part of your campaign. Do you personally believe in national service, and are these things you're going to fight for? Or was this just, something, because look, Mark, honestly, we've both been involved in campaigns and we know that there's a huge list of commitments made and then there's often a smaller list of commitments kept. And he said to me, no, this is a priority for me for all the reasons I just went into about how service impacts the lives of Americans of all backgrounds. To that point that we just heard in the opening from Vivian, the question from Mike Brown, someday we should all ask each other, where do you serve? I think that bringing Americans together, which is a central plank of what President Biden ran on, increasing our unity, bringing us together as a country, and the experience that so many have had, whether it was in military or in civilian service, of having a sense of service to our nation. Those are two important pieces, I think, of why President Biden and I and many others here in the Senate see national service as a vital part of addressing the civic moment we are in right now, when we are so divided on partisan lines and where there are so many questioning the very project of citizen leadership and of democracy.
What is the scale? When you look historically now, over 60 years in the case of the Peace Corps, almost 250,000 Americans have served, and 25 plus years for AmeriCorps, over 1 million. Impressive numbers. But what should we be aspiring to? What is the kind of scale that you would like to see for service? Is this an opportunity for every American who wants it? I served on the National Commission on Military, National, and Public Service. Right. Reflected on General McChrystal's notion of 1 million military position and a concomitant number of civilian volunteer opportunities. What is the scale you think the movement should be aspiring to?
Well, aspiring, I would be thrilled to see the kinds of numbers you just discussed and that the commission recommended in terms of both military and civilian service opportunities. Right now, we're at about 75,000 a year in terms of AmeriCorps members full-time. And the reality, as you well know, is that 5, 6, or 7 times as many young people graduating from college or leaving high school and looking for some service opportunity between high school and college, or high school in the beginning of their work lives. There are many times as many young Americans seeking service opportunities as there are available slots. So I would love to see us get to 250,000 a year AmeriCorps program slots in our country. That would meet the Edward M. Kennedy National Service Act, which was passed into law as the nation's enduring monument to Senator Ted Kennedy. But frankly, getting the financial support to get from 75 to 100,000 and then 150 and then 175 is really ambitious. To put a specific number on it, I am going to be fighting hard for $8 billion in 3-year funding in what I suspect will be a robust jobs and infrastructure package adopted here in the coming months. But having just gotten $1 billion, which doubles the size of AmeriCorps for the coming year, I'm hopeful that that will lay the groundwork so that we will go from 75 perhaps to 100,000 for several years. Part of, I think, the challenge of expanding civilian service in the United States is to come up with a new way to frame it. And I am excited about the idea of a civilian climate corps, something that relatively newer senators, Senator Heinrich and Senator Lujan of New Mexico, I was literally just speaking with them about it on the floor a few minutes ago. Both of them are veterans of the state Civilian Conservation Corps in New Mexico, and to have folks who have done their service in an AmeriCorps program and then are now elected to the Senate makes me feel old, but also inspired at the same time. I also, frankly, think that this could win Republican support. The Civilian Conservation Corps, the CCC, which was an FDR program in the depths of the Depression that gave millions of Americans the opportunity to be engaged in improving the infrastructure in our public lands and our national parks, left a lasting and positive mark. And so I am hopeful that we will find some bipartisanship in support of the expansion of Civilian Conservation Corps, which already exists in almost every state in America.
As you broaden out the question of this moment in American civic life, one of the things that certainly came through unexpected in our commission work was the issue of civics education. And the Institute of Politics maintains a very vibrant civics program in Cambridge and Boston schools. Could you speak to us where you see civic education factoring into this moment in our civic life?
Funny you should mention that. I have a bipartisan bill called the Civics Secures Democracy Act, which I've introduced recently, to my delight and surprise, with Senator John Cornyn of Texas. This was initially written and introduced by Rosa DeLauro, Congresswoman from Connecticut, chair of the Appropriations Committee, and by Tom Cole of Oklahoma and Earl Blumenauer of Colorado, I believe. But to have DeLauro and Cole, a Democrat and a Republican on the Appropriations Committee, very senior members of the House, as well as Senator Cornyn and myself, I think gives this real lift. It would authorize $1 billion in new spending for civics education, K through 12. It would support programs that help teachers of civics, institutions that do research on curricular materials for civics, and centers in universities and in the nonprofit world that help with those supports for the teaching of civics. So it would energize the teaching of civics in the United States. It's backed by a robust coalition known as the Civics Now Coalition. And there's some folks, dear friends of mine, who've been very actively engaged in it. Alan Solomon from Tufts, who helps run their program in service in particular. So why do I think this is an important thing for us to enact now and to help fund? Well, bluntly, the most jarring example, I think, of a lack of a grasp of our common project was the riot here in the Capitol on January 6th. The fact that, President Trump, forgive me, but was able to spread a demonstrable lie about the outcome of the election to persuade tens of millions of Americans that a legitimate election should be overturned, not through court action, although he did certainly try that unsuccessfully 60 times, but through violence at the Capitol to literally try and interrupt the counting of votes. That so many members of the House and Senate supported that, and that it is more reminiscent to me of the very difficult transitions in emerging democracies rather than an established democracy like ours, gave me real pause. I am encouraged that this bill is bipartisan and that we've gotten support from a wide range of Republicans and Democrats for a previous bill that this builds upon that authorizes the teaching of civics. But bluntly, Mark, I think we're at a point where our politics, which have always been rough and at times loud, have become tumultuous and divisive. We go through periods like this. I mean, the late 60s, early 70s were somewhat similar. The 20s and 30s had periods of great political turmoil as well. But in some ways, I think the events of the last year have strained the bonds of citizenship and fellow feeling amongst Americans in some ways more than at any point in my life. And that's why I think we need to reinvest in reviving a sense of our shared civic purpose and the significance of democracy.
Before I turn to kind of current events, just to build on that, the Institute of Politics has for 20 years done a very significant youth poll. And one of the questions coming out, we'll release it in April of this year. We found a majority of young Americans say that politics today is no longer able to meet the kind of challenges that our country is facing. And only sort of around 40% really say that working in some form of public service is appealing to them. I guess my question to you as we kind of conclude this part of our conversation is, Why do you think that is the case? And what can be done about it? I mean, our mission in the Kennedy School is imbued with President Kennedy's vision and call to service. So how do you reflect on that? All of these are elements of it that you're a leader on, but how do you react to that? And what other elements do you think about in this context?
Well, first, I think there is a steadily sinking confidence that politics and our political system can deliver meaningful solutions to the problems that majority of Americans face in their daily lives, because we've demonstrably failed to do so. Whether it was the opioid addiction crisis or gun violence, whether it's improving our schools or dealing with climate change, there is a sense that there's a lot that is broken, like our immigration system, that legislation is the only path forward to solve, and where they don't see those legislated solutions happening. Earlier today, I was in an hour-long meeting of a dozen Republican and Democratic senators just to try and assess the state of our politics on immigration and whether or not we can make steps forward towards, for example, a path towards citizenship for dreamers. Most of the folks who were in the room were part of an effort now 3 years ago where we met, a group hosted by Susan Collins of Maine, and where ultimately we put 4 bills on the floor, and they got 52 votes, 54 votes, 38 votes, but none of them got 60 votes. There was newer, younger senators in the room today. Some of the folks who were with us then are no longer serving. And it was striking to have to go back and explain the context and explain the challenges. But as I was just discussing on the floor with some of my Republican colleagues, there is a sense of optimism that we have to deliver solutions, because bluntly, it is hurting our country overseas. Competitors like the Chinese and the Russians are telling the world, see, the gridlock in Washington shows that democracy can't work. Our own people are losing confidence. And frankly, Mark, part of the challenge is that our own people are increasingly getting their news from divisive and isolated sources. If you watch Fox and MSNBC all day, it's almost as if they are describing different realities. And the term that I hear more often these days than any other to describe one's political opponents is they're crazy. That's just insane. That's just out of bounds. And so the language that I hear commonly used throughout our country about political opponents has stopped being about policy differences and has started being about marginalization, disrespect, and an unwillingness to work together. I think there is less enthusiasm for compromise in focus groups that my caucus just went over last night. An awful lot of Democrats were saying we need to fight harder, not we need to listen better and work harder to find compromise. And in some ways, the smash mouth politics of the last 4 years, need I say anything about Twitter and our immediate past president, has fueled a sense of a sort of war of all against all, rather than a politics of reasoned compromise.
Well, let me, if I could, to some current events. Obviously, we've come off 2 tragedies in mass shootings, starting with the horrific events in Atlanta that's shown this bright spotlight on the harassment and violence and hate directed towards the AAPI community, and obviously in Boulder just recently. So my question to you, Senator, is about gun control in the Senate. And the president has called for an assault weapons ban, as well as for high-capacity ammunition magazines, enhanced background checks. But I noted in Tuesday, he said, when they asked about legislative success and the prospects of it, he said, I don't know, I hope so. I haven't done the counting yet, which is fair enough. It's early. I guess my question for you is, what do you see the prospects for meaningful gun control legislation in the Senate passage?
I'll just be blunt and save us time. I don't think there are reasonable, credible prospects for the sorts of things that I think of as significant and sweeping for universal background checks. I just don't see that there's the votes there or the movement in that direction. If anything, this is an area where the parties have hardened. I am the co-sponsor, again, with John Cornyn of Texas, of a bill that would require that state and local law enforcement be promptly notified if a person prohibited, so in other words, a convicted felon, goes into a gun store, lies, and tries to buy a gun. Will this solve the problems with gun violence in America? No, far from it. Would it save hundreds of lives a year? Yes, it would. So one of the things I'm trying to do is to help us build back the muscle memory of actually legislating on something that has broad bipartisan agreement. We had a hearing on gun violence yesterday where Chairman Durbin and Ranking Member Grassley, Senator Cornyn, and I all talked about this bill, the Nix Denial Notification Act, and said it was something that we ought to take up and pass. I don't think, now I will remind you, Joe Biden is the only senator who took on the NRA twice and won, and managed to get an assault weapons ban signed into law back in, I think it was 1994. But I just don't see that there is the political will or framing to allow us to do that right now, because we still have a 60 vote margin for important bills like a gun background check bill or an assault weapons ban. And I cannot imagine getting 10 votes in the current Republican caucus for those sorts of initiatives.
Well, let me build on that as we look to the future of the agenda. And obviously the success to date of the American Rescue Plan and certainly more vaccinations, proceeding, good early days success, challenges of immigration. When you look at perhaps gun control, perhaps infrastructure, the question in the energy coming in and around the filibuster question. Speak to us about that, what you see the Senate procedural reforms, if any, looming, because several times you've mentioned this question of the threshold of 60 votes.
I think we will see a substantial and bipartisan bill taken up and passed in the next 2 to 3 months, led by Senator Schumer and Young, that will reinvest in American manufacturing and innovation, that is principally positioned as a bill to help us better compete with China. I do think you'll see that pass with 70 votes. I am hopeful that we can do a very large infrastructure bill, maybe as much as $1 trillion with bipartisan votes. After that, the bills that I think are going to clear a 60 vote threshold drop off pretty sharply. I have a dozen of them, but they are all smaller bills, not big transformative bills. And I think we will use reconciliation one more time this year to pass by 50 votes what will likely be a $2 or even $3 trillion bill that deals with climate, that deals with job creation, that invests money in schools and hospitals, and that may include a lot of those infrastructure elements that I just mentioned in a bill I hope would be bipartisan. Beyond that, I see no prospect for the end of the filibuster. I don't understand why so many activists are convinced it's about to happen. When Senator Sinema and Senator Manchin, both of whom represent states where it's good politics for them to fight reforming the filibuster, have steadfastly said, I have absolutely no intention of changing my vote or my view on that. I just discussed that with both of them in the last few days, and they reconfirmed that. So frankly, I think we're going to discover that if we want to pass bigger, bolder things, we're going to have to figure out ways that we can either win more Senate seats for Democrats, change the minds of a hardy handful determined not to change the filibuster, or rededicate ourselves to persuading each other in a way that might get us back to a place where we actually compromise with some regularity. Mitch McConnell used the filibuster to great effect when Barack Obama was president to block an awful lot of his legislative initiatives. It is both a sword and a shield. And I join a number of my colleagues, like Angus King of Maine, who wrote this column today in, I think, the Washington Post, in reminding my younger and more impatient colleagues that just a few years ago, when we were in the minority and Republicans controlled the House and the Senate, the filibuster was the only thing that prevented them from passing sweeping laws that would do all sorts of things, like essentially outlaw labor unions, a national right to work bill, or a national criminalization of abortion, or dramatic and sweeping changes to the workplace, to clean air and clean water laws, to the financial structure of our country. So I think some caution is called for in a moment when there's a lot of heat and light about how there's imminently going to be a change to the filibuster, a change that I don't see coming. I do think we will still pass two of the most significant pieces of legislation in my lifetime this year. The American Rescue Plan was just passed, and it is just now being absorbed. It's not just a few checks and a couple of dollars for vaccines. It's $1.9 trillion, and it includes the most progressive changes to the child tax credit and the earned income tax credit in modern history that will cut the rate of child poverty in our country in half. It does things, doubling the size of AmeriCorps is so small relative to the size of the overall bill that it's barely mentioned, but it is literally the biggest change in national service in more than 25 years.
Correct. $1 billion. Yeah. So it's a little bit of be careful what you wish for, right? And thread it into. So it kind of begs my question: what is the mood of Senate Democrats as you go to 2022? And given this very slim majority, given the state of the Senate majority right now, speak to the mood of Senate Democrats right now?
It could not be a slimmer majority. It's 50-50. Right. So we are routinely calling upon Vice President Kamala Harris, former senator from California, to come back to the chamber and to give us the 51st vote. And it means that a small number of moderate Democrats like Joe Manchin and Kyrsten Sinema are outcome determinative. If they change their mind and decide they won't support a nominee, well, that nominee is largely over in recent weeks. Look, there is some optimism because of the number of things that are coming our way from the House and the number of bold ideas proposed by the president and our success in passing the American Rescue Plan. But there's also some tension because we have a number of our incumbents up for reelection. Senator Hassan of New Hampshire, just a little bit north of Cambridge, Senator Warnock of Georgia, Senator Kelly of Arizona are a number of our vulnerable incumbents who are going to be up for re-election. And there have been 5 Republicans who have retired, to my surprise and disappointment. Roy Blunt of Missouri, a friend of mine, among them. And those are creating opportunities for pickups for Democrats in Pennsylvania, in Wisconsin, in Missouri. So we'll see. It's hard to predict, but I think we're going to work our hardest this year to help the American people get out of this pandemic, get out of the mess that the last president got us into, reopen schools, reopen businesses. I'm actually cautiously optimistic that by May we will be awash in vaccines, that we will be able to engage in robust vaccine diplomacy internationally, that we will vaccinate every American who's willing to get one, and that we will see businesses and schools reopen and robust growth restart in the fall.
I want to go to student questions, but quickly, I noted with interest, the president has tapped you to address provide perspective to him in Ethiopia, the northern region in Ethiopia, the Tigray region, in your visit. Could you speak to that humanitarian crisis, which is looming issues of food security, and Secretary Blinken's comments certainly about it in terms of the immediate needs that exist, and what is your hope for the future of this very troubled global pressing issue in Ethiopia?
Well, Ethiopia, as you know, is a multi-ethnic, multilingual, multi-faith federal republic, a democracy notionally that has never really had a free and fair election. The election is scheduled for June 5th. President Biden paid me the honor of asking me to go directly to Addis, the capital, and meet with the Prime Minister Abe, and hand deliver a letter from President Biden.
And that was over the weekend?
I just did that. I left Thursday night, flew 15 hours, spent 2 days doing 12-hour days of meetings, and then flew back and just arrived on Monday evening. So 33 hours of travel for 48 hours on the ground. It was a truly memorable experience. My delegation traveled in the belly of a C-17 troop transport. This was no luxury first class, Skyliner experience. And, frankly, COVID is rampant in Addis, so it was also not without its concerns. But I ended up spending 5 hours with the Prime Minister, 3 hours on Saturday, 2 hours on Sunday, really hammering out 4 key issues. And then I also met with the President, the Deputy Prime Minister, the National Security Advisor, the head of the AU, a whole group of ambassadors, leaders of humanitarian relief groups, and the head of the Ethiopian Human Rights Commission. The core issues that I was really pressing the Prime Minister on were unhindered, unfettered access for humanitarian relief up into Tigray, where as many as 4 million Tigrayans are facing famine and hunger. a cessation of hostilities and a declaration of a ceasefire to allow for that humanitarian access, full transparency and accountability for human rights violations, no matter by whom committed, whether by the TPLF or Eritreans, by the Ethiopian Defense Forces or the Amhara militia, and then some path forward towards reconciliation, a negotiated peace for the region, recognizing that a military solution is unlikely to be successful. We also talked about some important regional issues, the Grand Ethiopian Renaissance Dam, or the GERD, a massive dam at the headwaters of the Blue Nile that has got Sudan and Egypt quite agitated, and the potential for armed conflict with Sudan in a triangle, in a region called El Fashaga, which is just west of Tigray in Sudan. So there have been very positive steps, Mark, in the last 2 days. The Prime Minister has made some public statements recognizing the presence of Eritrean troops for the first time, committing himself to a transparent, international, credible human rights investigation, and making progress in humanitarian relief. But, frankly, there's also been today reports of further atrocities, the execution of civilians, and bluntly, it remains a very troubled province and region. And there are lots of reasons to worry about the path forward. So I'm going to stay very actively engaged. I'm looking forward to personally briefing President Biden, and then likely to return to Ethiopia in the coming weeks.
Well, thank you, Senator, for your service. That is impressive, and certainly a testament to the president's respect for you. And it's a country the Peace Corps has long operated in so many ties. And so thank you for what you're doing. I want to get out to our students. They have important questions for you. Noah, a student from the college, we invite you to unmute yourself and ask Senator Coons your question.
Hi, Senator Coons. Thank you so much for making the time to be here today. It's been fascinating to hear this discussion. And I think many of us would agree that your commitment to bipartisanship and reaching across the aisle is so noble and important, especially in today's America. And it's fascinating to hear about the bipartisan support for national service in particular. I read a quote from, I believe, last summer in a New York Times article where you explained that you had had numerous conversations with senators who were really struggling, Republican senators struggling to publicly support the president at the time, balancing their actual viewpoints with electability and other partisan issues. So how would you describe the political calculus that Republican lawmakers were doing at that point, deciding whether to show public support? And how do you think we can get to a place in American politics where actual progress is the goal as opposed to, hyperpartisanship?
Well, Noah, thank you for those questions, for your research and your attentiveness, and for the compliments you paid me, undeserved, I believe. Frankly, one of the challenges of having genuine friends in the other caucus was being able to continue to have any sort of a friendship or relationship as they supported a nominee and then a president of their party whose values and actions I found just appalling at times. I think he genuinely put our national security at risk. I think he was demonstrably either indifferent or hostile to some of the core underpinnings of democracy. And I have great respect for colleagues like Jeff Flake and Bob Corker, who literally gave up their careers in elected office rather than violate some of their core commitments by embracing Trump, as others did. Boy, I could go on this topic for a while. Oh, there's Jeff. Hey, Jeff. I was literally just complimenting Senator Flake.
You never know what might happen here at the forum, Senator.
I'll get choked up if I talk about it too much, but I will never forget Jeff texting me and saying, come to the floor in the next couple of minutes. There's a development. And I ran into his wife, Cheryl, and his chief of staff in the elevator, and she had tears in her eyes. And I realized what was happening likely was that Senator Flake was about to give the speech saying, I'm not running for re-election. And look, we're almost exactly the same age. We've served in elected office almost exactly the same length of time as of then. And I don't know if there were a Democrat where I generally agreed with their policy outcomes, but found them personally sort of morally abhorrent and just disliked a lot of how they conducted themselves. Would I have the courage to stand up and say, you know what? you may be from my party, but you don't reflect my values. Would I be able to stand for principle rather than party? That's something Jeff did, and I deeply admire him for. And he not only did that, he ultimately ended up publicly supporting now President Biden in his campaign, and that I know has been personally costly for him. I have members of my own family who were, committed, hardcore, lifelong Republicans who've left the party. And I have others who to this day are Trump supporters and who are angry at me for, in their view, my refusal to recognize that the election was stolen by President Biden, all of that in air quotes. So this is a difficult and a divisive time. I think it's important for us to recognize those who made real sacrifices to test or challenge the standard bearer of their party over the last couple of years. And I think Democrats need to have a certain amount of humility that, moral probity is not sort of the unique bailiwick of one party as opposed to the other. I mean, these things do have a period over time. And I'm certain the day will come when there's a president of my party who I don't find as admirable as our current president. So I don't know if I'm giving you a concrete or direct answer. But your last question really was, when will we get back to a politics of purpose and of problem solving rather than a politics of division and hyperpartisanship? I was just on the floor of the Senate talking to Mike Braun, just to pick one example. It is Mike's birthday today. I think I was one of the few senators I heard walking over and saying, "Happy birthday, Mike. What are your plans this evening?" On some level, you just got to be human beings. You got to be kind to each other, even though you differ. We both walked to the floor and I voted yes and he voted no on the same person, and then proceeded to have a conversation. He's the co-chair of the Climate Solutions Caucus with me. He beat my friend Joe Donnelly. I mean, when he first got elected, I just was like, I believed all the stuff I saw about him on TV ads. But I took the chance to go sit down with him, listen to him, and try and hear what his priorities are. And he is a genuine conservative, but he's also committed to conservation. And out of that has come a constructive working partnership. Nothing like I had with my friend Jeff Flake when we wrote the End Wildlife Trafficking Act. But eventually, if you're willing to be open-hearted, if you're willing to be led by faith in our nation and optimism about our future, you will eventually find partners here. You will eventually find people where the democratic process has delivered, folks you can work with. Although I will say, literally on the floor tonight, a couple of us were talking to Roy Blunt about, why he's announced his departure and who might succeed him and so forth. And it is a harder time since folks like Jeff Flake and Bob Corker and Johnny Isakson and John McCain are no longer here as good and impressive partners on important issues.
Noah, thank you for that very thoughtful question. And this is perfect timing to welcome in one of our questioners, here, a longtime friend to yours, Senator Jeff Flake. Senator, thanks for joining us.
Hey, you bet. Thanks for letting me horn in here. Let me just say, while I'm intensely jealous of Chris going to Africa over the weekend without me, I have to say that a lot of people, anybody in Congress, if you ask them if they're bipartisan, they'll say they are. They'll say they try to work across the aisle. But the truth is, very few really do these days. But one that does all the time is Chris Coons. I mean, he walks the walk, and every Republican in the Senate will tell you that. And so I just applaud him for continuing to do that. Anyway, it's a tough road. It used to get you accolades to say that you reached across the aisle. Now it just gets you a primary. So it's kind of a tough road. But I enjoyed obviously having Chris there at the IOP in 2019. That was my most popular guest by far, I think. And anyway, but let me just ask Chris, typically, the saying is that politics stops at the water's edge. Where are there some opportunities in the foreign policy arena for bipartisanship, particularly coming out of this last presidency?
Jeff,
I'm sure you have some ideas.
Jeff, thank you. Thank you for your friendship, for your service, and for the heart that you bring to your elected service and now to your leadership and your voice and your engagement. It would have been a blast to have you along on that trip to Ethiopia this weekend. It was exactly the kind of crazy, exhausting, last-minute trip that we enjoyed together to Zimbabwe and so many other countries. And it is the kind of work that gives you that sense of urgency and purpose and engagement. To be with a very proud, very accomplished head of state. He won the Nobel Peace Prize, for crying out loud. And to engage in a conversation that is forceful, pointed, and difficult, and to recognize that it's really because you represent the United States that this head of state, this leader, is tolerating your very hard push. You've known that moment. I've known that moment, and it is one of the best parts of service here. So to your question, in the last 4 years, it was somewhat disheartening, particularly the last two. Jim Risch and Bob Menendez, as chair and ranking of the Foreign Relations Committee, were just at absolute loggerheads. The floor of the Senate, frankly, got turned into a factory for conservative judges, and the legislating was bare bones. Today, we had the first robust, fulsome business meeting of the Foreign Relations Committee. We passed 17 bills and resolutions. I had one with Rob Portman about doing debt swaps for nature preservation, the coral reefs and tropical forests, reauthorizing a bill that puts $200 million a year into those programs. The most exciting area, Jeff, that I think really has promise is in China. Menendez and Risch, who complimented each other repeatedly today, are taking the core provisions of a Democrat-only bill and a Republican-only bill from the last Congress, and they are sort of shaving off the hard edges and putting them together. Senator Schumer and Senator Young are leading the introduction in about 3 weeks of a bill that's going to have pieces from 5 different committees. The core focus of the bill is how do we rejuvenate American manufacturing, research and development, innovation, in an area of particular interest to Arizona, the manufacturing of semiconductors. All of this with an eye towards how do we compete more effectively with China. But frankly, as much as the substance of the bill, the fact that there is a bill that'll be robust, I mean, probably over $100 billion in spending, and that will authorize a dozen new activities, that a bill like that can get taken up and passed in the Senate. And I think it will end up getting 65 or 70 votes. That in and of itself is enormously encouraging. Todd Young is a conservative Republican from Indiana. He's up for re-election, and Chuck Schumer is legislating with him. You know how surprising that is, Jeff. Chuck is a relentlessly partisan leader, and it's my hope that that experience will both increase the appetite on the part of Leader Schumer for more legislating, and show other Republicans that you can legislate with Schumer and live to tell the tale. So I also just had a great conversation on the floor with Roy Blunt about infrastructure. Lindsey and I, Senator Graham of South Carolina, and I have a bill about preventing future pandemics by reining in these so-called wet markets, wide open wildlife markets in the developing world. There's a lot of different areas in international relations, confronting the construction of Nord Stream, trying to rein in Iran's dangerous nuclear program, trying to find ways to support a two-state solution in Israel. I mean, there's quite a few areas where I think there are prospects for bipartisanship. But Jeff, none of them more important than showing that we can legislate in a meaningful way and confront China's challenge to our democracy.
That's great. Thank you.
Thanks so much for joining us. It's great to see you. Our next question is from Kennedy School student Nick Sun. Nick, we invite you to unmute yourself and ask Senator Coons your question. Nick. Nick.
Thank you very much, Director Gearan. Sorry, I'm unable to start my video.
No worries.
Thank you very much, Director Gearan. Thank you very much, Senator Coons. Really appreciated your candid insights into current affairs. But I would love to actually revisit the conversation on national service, because before you talked about reframing national service, and I think that when Americans think of national service, they overwhelmingly think of the armed forces and people who serve in the military. I think that overwhelmingly diplomats and development practitioners are overlooked. I served in Peace Corps Nepal, and I served a second tour in Peace Corps Rwanda before coming to the Kennedy School, a second year here. And so as a senator whose party wants to lead with diplomacy and maybe also lead with development, how do we begin to reframe national service beyond the military to include State Department officers, USAID, and Peace Corps volunteers for both the American people and for your fellow senators who control the power of the purse to actually fund State Department, USAID, and the Peace Corps?
That's a great question, Nick, and thank you for your 2 tours of service. I suspect as an RPCV, you're discovering that there is both this incredible network of returned Peace Corps volunteers and this challenge in terms of Peace Corps volunteers getting the same respect that is afforded military veterans. First, there is now a Foreign Service Caucus. A group of us were just talking about this the other day. Chris Van Hollen and Dan Sullivan. Chris, the son of a seasoned Foreign Service officer, and Dan, a former Marine, have recognized that we need to pay as much attention to our development professionals and our diplomats as we do to those in our armed forces. Second, I led with Senator Graham of South Carolina an effort that produced something called the Global Fragility Act. As if by luck or providence, the person on the National Security Council responsible for implementing it was on the plane to Ethiopia this weekend. So she regretted that because she got hours of input from the junior senator from Delaware. But the Global Fragility Act, which was the result of a 1.5-year-long blue ribbon panel that the Institute of Peace convened, in a simple sentence punchline, says that in developing a strategy for how to deal with fragility, whether it's in the Sahel in Western Africa, or it's in the Northern Triangle in Central America, whether it's countries like Ethiopia or countries like Bangladesh, we need to have a strategy that puts development first, diplomacy second, defense third, in rough order, that needs to have development and diplomacy leading and address governance and address issues of national cohesion and opportunity before looking at things just through a narrow security and defense lens. When you're a hammer, everything looks like a nail. When you're deployed as the military liaison to try and combat terrorism in Niger or Mali or Burkina Faso, and the tools you have are Reaper drones and military hardware and military training, it is just part of your mindset and worldview that you're going to see these problems as problems that need to be addressed through the military. If your background is as a Peace Corps volunteer, someone who has done grassroots development and lived in a community and seen the world in some ways from the bottom up, you're more likely to see these contests and challenges that make countries fragile as being ones that need closing the distance between the capital and the more remote parts of the country that are underdeveloped, that are disenfranchised, and where some reconciliation and some legitimacy are important. So, Nick, that's a long-winded answer, I suspect, to a simple question. But that's authorized at $1 billion a year. The new administration is beginning the process of coming up with a concrete strategy, and it's in its first full year of implementation. I think there are large and small ways for us to elevate the role of diplomats and development professionals, and those are just 2 of them.
Thank you, Nick.
Thank you very much, Senator.
Very good question. Senator, you've been very generous with your time and certainly have inspired us with your reflections on national service, the Biden agenda, looking at the importance of global issues. And so we applaud what you're doing, from Ethiopia to national service to your work throughout the Senate in building bipartisan solutions on some of these key issues. So our thanks. We just offer you any closing reflections and before we conclude our evening together.
Well, I know I'm literally preaching to the choir, or I guess figuratively, if I'm talking to an audience that features a lot of folks who have decided to dedicate their lives to solving problems, complex problems through public service. But let me just say to the folks who are watching this conversation that we're having, that I spent 8 years in the private sector. I worked for a very exciting, inspiring, innovative company. I was well compensated. I got to be part of high-performing teams, and it had its own rewards and joys. But I almost never got a lump in my throat. I almost never got a chill on days when we inked a particularly big contract for selling great raincoats to a new partner or customer, or great medical devices. I love the people I worked with, and I enjoyed learning the discipline of the private sector. But on my last day running an AmeriCorps program, as I was training a whole group of young Americans, and they were beginning their year of service, and on my first day as county council president, presiding over a difficult budget process, I got a lump in my throat. I felt challenged and moved and inspired by the hard work that is democracy. I don't hesitate to say what my kids sometimes say, "Oh, Dad, that's cheesy." But democracy requires sacrifice. It requires service. It requires humility. And our democracy in the last year has seen more strains and more challenges than at any time in my life. My father, a Harvard graduate himself, was grateful for the chance to serve our nation as a sergeant in the 1st Infantry in Germany. And his dying words to me were in no small part a reminder that of the decades that he spent doing many things in his life. The 2 years that he spent in the United States military was the most inspiring, taught him the most, challenged him the most, and he was the most proud of those 2 years. I hope that I can someday, in some small way, measure up to him. So many of the people who I served with or have served with have been such better examples of national service than I am. I am humbled by the fact that I am currently speaking to you from what was John McCain's office. And I have over on the mantle there pictures of my first trip with him to Afghanistan and my last trip with him to Vietnam. Neither party has an exclusive hold on what it means to be a patriot. Neither party has all the answers for the path forward for our nation. But I know that you do, that some of the folks on this call who will dedicate your lives to service, whether in remote countries like Nepal and Rwanda, or in teaching in neighborhoods like Roxbury, I know that you have the heart and the passion and the energy that will save our democracy, bring us together as a nation, and move us forward. And I cannot tell you how urgent and how rewarding that work is. Thank you.
Senator, that's a great close, and certainly you model that each and every day, and you gave us the inspiration tonight. To all those who asked questions, I thank you. In case of Nick, for your service, and certainly to Vivian for kicking us off so beautifully and expertly. Thank you all so much for joining us. Please join the forum next week, where we'll have an important session on disinformation with our colleagues at the Shorenstein Center and the Institute of Politics at the University of Chicago. We're closing out all the activities we've had from the forum with Queen Rania and Madeleine Albright for Women's History Month, as well as other activities. But we invite you to our website to stay current with our events. Senator, congratulations again on your induction to the Service Hall of Fame, and thank you most sincerely for joining us tonight. Good night, everyone.